I signed my wife's family's prenup when I was broke. After she cheated, her parents demanded I tear it up so she could take half my fortune. Alright, so this might be a bit of a story, but I just need to get it off my chest. I'm not really looking for any consolation or advice. So, when I first met Melissa, I was just starting out with a basic job, had student loans to worry about, and was sharing a cramped apartment with some roommates. Melissa's family, on the other hand, wasn't like super rich or anything, but they were doing pretty well for themselves. They owned property, had a thriving local business, and lived in a big house in a fancy neighborhood. Clearly, our bank accounts were from different worlds. We dated for about a year, and things were pretty good between us. But when marriage started coming up in our conversations, things got complicated. Her parents, especially her dad, were really involved in her life and choices. They weren't rude or anything at first, but they made it clear they had some concerns about my financial situation compared to theirs. They didn't outright call me broke, but you could tell what they were getting at. They said Melissa was used to a certain lifestyle, and they'd worked hard to build their wealth, so they wanted to make sure their daughter would be financially secure if anything went south. Their solution? A prenup. This wasn't a suggestion or anything. It was a must if I wanted their backing, and the cash to fund the wedding. They set up a lawyer for me, or more like insisted I use their guy. The lawyer was supposed to go over the prenup and make sure it was fair, but you could bet his main job was to get me to sign on the dotted line without making a fuss. They did say I could get my own lawyer, but with the wedding plans rolling, I didn't have much time or money to find someone who could take them on. The prenup was pretty straightforward. If we split up, I wouldn't get any of Melissa's stuff from before the marriage, any inheritance, or any boost in value of her separate property. They hammered home that I wouldn't get a piece of any future assets tied to my income or investments unless some very specific, almost impossible, conditions were met. Basically, her stuff stayed hers, my stuff stayed mine, and we wouldn't mix our finances like most married couples do. Alimony was barely a thing unless Melissa needed some temporary cash, but nothing big or long term. When I read through the prenup, it made sense. At that point in my life, I didn't have any significant assets to call my own, and making bank felt like a distant dream. They put a lot of pressure on me to sign it. The wedding was moving forward, and Melissa saw it as something we had to do to keep her family happy. I felt like my choices were to sign it and marry Melissa with her family's blessing or say no and risk breaking up or marrying without their support, which would have been a rough way to start. So, I signed it, and that was that. We got hitched and stashed the prenup away. Life was tight financially in the early years. I kept on with my entry-level job while hunting for ways to earn more. Melissa was working part-time but eventually took care of managing the house as my job started eating up more of my time. Her family never brought the prenup up again. It was just a piece of paper collecting dust. I got really focused on building something for myself because my corporate job wasn't cutting it. I started tinkering with a side project in tech. It meant a lot of late nights and weekends, pouring any extra cash we had into it. Melissa kept things running at home, and we lived pretty modestly despite her family's wealth, old cars, a small house, no handouts from her folks except for the usual gifts. That side hustle started picking up. It was no overnight success story, but after a few years of hustle and grind, I quit my job to go all in. We talked through the risks, no steady paycheck for a while. Melissa was on board, even though her family had their doubts. But I kept at it. Slowly, the business took off. I found my niche, built a team, and put the profits back into growing it. So, about 5 years into our marriage, something pretty awesome happened. My business took off in a big way. We weren't just making money, we were actually profitable, growing fast, and even catching the eye of some investors. My stakes in the company, plus other smart investments I made, started turning into real wealth. It was all thanks to my hard work and the business success after we got hitched. I suddenly found myself being richer than Melissa's folks, and yeah, I could call myself a millionaire. This change was kind of obvious in how we started living. We kept our actual numbers under wraps, but we did move to a bigger house in a nice neighborhood, not quite where her parents live though. We also started traveling more, and with the business doing well, Melissa stopped working altogether, handling our ever-growing household instead. This definitely shook things up. Her folks, who weren't too impressed with me at first, started showing interest in my work and asked me for investment tips, praising my business savvy. That prenup they insisted on? It never really came up in conversations after that. But with all the success, our marriage started to feel the strain. I was all about the business grind, and though Melissa enjoyed the comforts it brought, we seemed to drift apart. She focused on running the home and her social life while I was buried in work. We stopped really connecting, and our talks mostly revolved around chores or social plans. Our shared dreams kind of faded away. Then, around the decade mark of our marriage, things started feeling off. Melissa acted distant, was secretive with her phone, and seemed unavailable more often. When I tried talking to her about it, she'd get defensive. It wasn't a big aha moment, just little things adding up. Eventually, I found out in a roundabout way, Melissa was seeing someone else. A guy from her new social scene, with some serious family money. From what I gathered, they'd been involved for a while. Once I found out, things unraveled pretty quickly. Her family switched from admiring my wealth to worrying about her financial future, anticipating a possible divorce. The guy she was seeing wasn't exactly offering her a future, he was married to and lived in another state. Her parents got anxious about her financial security if our marriage ended. They were upfront about it too. Her dad even called me to set up a meeting, saying it was urgent for the family's sake. That meetup was anything but fun. They admitted they knew about the affair and all our marital issues. The chat quickly turned to the prenup. Her dad reminded me about the prenup he made us sign ages ago but said it was now outdated since I'd done so well for myself. He argued that the prenup wasn't fair anymore since I could well provide for her, and insisted we scrap it. He wanted us to either get rid of it altogether or draft a new deal, so Melissa could get half of what we'd built if we split. He framed it as fair since she'd supported the home and my career all those years. The affair didn't even factor into what he said. Melissa was there too but mostly let her parents do the talking. When she did say something, it was that So, I felt that the agreement we had was totally outdated. It just didn't line up with our lives now. Melissa didn't seem to feel bad about her affair or care about our marriage. Instead, all she seemed to care about was getting her hands on my assets, the ones I worked my tail off for during our marriage. It was pretty clear she wanted to ditch the marriage, be with the other guy, or at least have the freedom to do so, and walk away with a big chunk of my money. When it came to their arguments, I just sat back and listened. Once they were done, I laid it out. That prenup we signed? Yeah, that's a legally binding contract. We had lawyers draft it, and both Melissa and I read through it, understood it, and signed it knowing full well what it meant. Plus, it was their idea to have it in the first place. Back then, I didn't have much, and they wanted to protect her wealth or stuff she had before we got married. The prenup was meant exactly for this kind of thing, where one of us might get rich while we were married. It doesn't have a way to just vanish because I made some money. I made it clear, I've done my bit in the marriage, and I expect us to stick to what we agreed on. Nope, I wasn't going to tear up the prenup or settle outside its terms. If there were going to be divorce proceedings, the prenup would be in full effect. Melissa and her folks were shocked and pretty angry when I didn't cave to their pressure. Her dad, especially, went from trying to reason with me to throwing around thinly veiled threats, talking about long court battles, public embarrassment, and expensive legal fees, hinting they'd drag it out in court to try and break the prenup. I stood firm. The agreement was clear, and I'd defend it. My lawyer, who's a pro with prenups, was ready for this. I got up, said the meeting was over, and left their place. Things got worse after that. Melissa started divorce proceedings, and her lawyers, probably egged on by her folks, went straight for the jugular, saying they were going to challenge the prenup. They were using arguments like her dad's, saying it was unfair because I got rich, that I somehow forced Melissa into signing it, even though they came up with it and she had her own lawyer. Now, they were after a hefty chunk of my money, as if the prenup didn't even exist. My legal team didn't miss a beat. We hit back, stating the prenup was rock solid. We had all the paperwork from when we signed, including proof that she had legal help, statements from her folks about why they wanted the prenup, and, of course, the prenup itself with our signatures. We pointed out that my financial success was exactly what the prenup was designed to handle. It was about setting expectations for future earnings and assets. My lawyers were all over their claims, dismantling them one by one. They showed Melissa had her own lawyer back then, the financial disclosures were spot on, and the terms about future wealth were totally clear. Plus, my change in financial status was all down to my hard work and investments, not any help from Melissa. Claims that the prenup was unfair because of my newfound wealth usually don't hold up unless the other party can't even meet their basic needs, which wasn't the case here since her family was well off. The court set a hearing to first deal with whether the prenup was valid before getting into dividing assets or alimony. As the proceedings went on, it became obvious that Melissa's case against the prenup was flimsy. Her own past words and her family's actions totally contradicted her current claim that she'd been forced or that it was unfair. My legal team put up a strong front, and the contract held up under scrutiny. So, here's what went down. It was looking like we'd lose in court over the prenup, so Melissa's legal team switched things up but still wouldn't settle based on what the prenup said. My lawyers told me to stand my ground because the prenup was my main shield, and turns out, it was pretty solid. The judge decided that the prenup was totally valid. Both of us had the chance to get lawyers when we signed it, and we were upfront about our assets. The terms were fair when we signed them, and just because I made a lot more money later, it didn't mean the prenup was suddenly unfair. The prenup got upheld completely, setting the stage for how the rest of the divorce would play out. The agreement meant that Melissa had given up most rights to my future earnings and significant alimony. Her lawyers tried to get a little more for her, but the prenup was pretty clear-cut. So, in the end, Melissa only got what she came into the marriage with, plus a tiny amount of transitional alimony. She didn't get a penny from my business or any of the investments I made during our marriage. Everything I built stayed with me, thanks to the prenup her family insisted on. This had a huge impact on Melissa. She'd been a stay-at-home wife for years, so she didn't have a career to fall back on or any significant income of her own. She was used to a comfy lifestyle funded by my wealth, but after the divorce, she couldn't claim any of it. Her assets were pretty minimal. Around the same time, her fling with the other guy fizzled out. Word on the street was that he wasn't planning on leaving his marriage or making a life with her. Once our divorce was final and she didn't get the big payout she expected, he ghosted. So, she was left with no partner and no financial security. With nowhere else to go, she moved back into her childhood room at her parents' mansion. They were well off, but their money was off limits to her. She was basically starting from square one, which was tougher because she was older and out of the job market for a while. The gossip through mutual friends was that she was stuck without a job and her plans for a cushy new life had fallen apart. As for me, I kept everything I'd worked for, the business, the wealth, and all the assets. But my marriage of over 10 years was officially over. It had been a draining experience going through the legal drama and dealing with her family. The whole decade plus of being with Melissa, with all its ups and downs, had wrapped up. Melissa ended up broke relative to the life she once had, while I came out with everything I had built. That's basically how it all unfolded, from signing a prenup when I was broke to building wealth and having to defend that prenup against the very people who made me sign it. It's all done now, and writing this just feels like laying out the facts. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. And hit the notification bell to stay updated with more crazy real-life stories happening around you.